My mother-in-law raised her glass and introduced my father as my hired help, sparking laughter from her wealthy friends who treated his worn coat like a cheap gag. But the laughing stopped when a guest collapsed. At the hospital, the staff did not see a servant. They stood at attention and saluted him. That was the moment I realized they had insulted the wrong man, and I had married into the wrong family. My name is Isla Coleman, and for the last 3 years, I have lived in a world where the price tag on a handbag matters more than the human hand holding it. That reality was never sharper than the night we walked into the Marlowe atrium. The venue was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make everyone inside feel simultaneously important and incredibly small. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt less like comfort and more like a preservation tactic for the icy blondes sipping champagne by the fountain. I walked in with my husband, Grant Ashford, on my left, and my father, Frank Dalton, on my right. The contrast between the two men could not have been more violent if I had painted it on a canvas. Grant was wearing a tuxedo that likely cost more than my father's car. He moved with that easy, oil-slick confidence of a man who has never had to worry about a utility bill in his entire life. He was busy scanning the room, his eyes darting over heads, looking for the next useful handshake, the next rung on the ladder. And then there was Dad. Frank Dalton was wearing his Sunday best. It was a charcoal suit he had bought 30 years ago for my mother's funeral. He had pressed it himself this morning. I knew this because I could smell the faint, comforting scent of heavy starch and steam that always clung to him. The fabric was clean, but it had that telltale sheen at the elbows and knees that comes from decades of wear. The lapels were a little too wide for current fashion, and the hem of his trousers broke just a fraction too high over his polished, sensible shoes. He walked with that slight, rhythmic hitch in his step, a souvenir from a life I was not allowed to talk about in this zip code. It was not a cripple's limp, just a stiffness, a hesitation in the right knee that flared up when it rained or when he had been standing too long, to anyone with a soul. He looked like a dignified, hard-working man doing his best. To the crowd at the Marlowe atrium, he looked like a stain on a silk sheet. "Keep up, Isla," Grant murmured, his hand tightening on my elbow. It was not a caress. It was a steering correction. "And for God's sake, tell Frank to stop looking at the architecture like he is inspecting the zoning permits. He sticks out enough as it is." "He is admiring the structure, Grant," I whispered back, keeping my smile plastered on for the benefit of the photographers near the entrance. "He used to build things, remember? He used to fix toilets and pour concrete," Grant corrected me, his voice low and smooth. "There is a difference. Just keep him away from the main investors. We need the Sterling account to close by the 1st of the month." I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck, but I swallowed it down. This was the deal. I had married Grant Ashford, the golden boy of Ashford Holdings, and the fine print of our marriage license seemed to include a clause that required me to erase where I came from. But tonight, I had insisted. It was my 30th birthday dinner, the one thing I had asked for, and I wanted my father there. We reached the table. It was prime real estate, right in the center of the atrium, under the massive crystal chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion. My in-laws were already seated. Warren Ashford, my father-in-law, was busy checking his watch, looking like he was billing us for his time. And Celia Ashford, my mother-in-law, sat like a queen on a throne, draped in enough diamonds to fund a small revolution. "You made it," Celia said, her eyes sliding over me and landing squarely on my father. She did not smile. Her expression was the same one she used when a waiter brought her the wrong vintage of wine, mild confusion mixed with deep distaste. "And you brought Mr. Dalton." "Good evening, Mrs. Ashford," Dad said. He held out his hand. His palm was calloused, the skin rough like sandpaper, and there was a long, jagged white scar running from his thumb to his wrist. It was an old injury, healed over but impossible to miss. Celia looked at his hand, then at the white tablecloth, and then back at his face. She did not take his hand. She just gestured vaguely to the empty chair. Sit down. Frank, try not to knock over the crystal. It is imported. Dad slowly lowered his hand. He did not look angry. He just nodded and sat down, moving his right leg carefully under the table to accommodate his knee. I sat next to him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The dinner was a masterclass in exclusion. The table was filled with the Ashford's friends, people with surnames that appeared on library wings and hospital donation plaques. They talked about summering in the vineyard, about the volatility of the tech sector, about which private school was accepting the right kind of children this year. They spoke over Dad. They spoke around him. It was as if he were made of glass. Then, the appetizers arrived, and Celia decided it was time to play her favorite game. She clinked her spoon against her glass. The sharp, high-pitched ring cut through the chatter. Everyone, Celia announced, her voice projecting with that practiced theatricality of a woman who assumes everyone wants to hear her. I realized I have been terribly rude. I have not properly introduced the extra guest at our table tonight. The table went quiet. Grant shifted in his seat, taking a sip of his scotch. He knew what was coming. He had to know. He did nothing. Celia gestured a manicured hand toward my father. This is Frank. He is Isla's father. We are so happy to have him. It is so rare to see someone from the service industry enjoying a meal like this. She paused for effect, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. Frank, tell everyone, what is it you do again? Were you a driver, or was it general maintenance? I always forget which uniform you used to wear. A ripple of laughter went around the table. It was not loud, boisterous laughter. It was that dry, polite, deadly chuckle of the upper class, the sound of people who think cruelty is witty. Dad looked up from his plate. He had barely touched his scallop ceviche. He looked at Celia, his eyes steady. I worked in public safety for a long time, Mrs. Ashford. And before that, I did whatever job put food on the table for my daughter. Public safety, a man across the table repeated. I knew him. It was Harrison Thorne, a hedge fund manager who had never done a day of manual labor in his life. He swirled his wine, looking at Dad with amusement. That is a fancy way of saying you carried a heavy belt, right? Tell me, Frank, do you know which fork to use for the salad? Or should we ask the waiter to bring you a wrench? Might feel more natural in those hands. The table erupted. This time, the laughter was louder. They felt permission now. The alpha had bitten, so the pack joined in. My hands were shaking under the table. I gripped my napkin until my knuckles turned white. I turned to Grant. I looked him dead in the eye, pleading silently. Say something. Defend him. He is your father-in-law. Grant refused to meet my gaze. He leaned in close to me, his breath hot against my ear. Isla, stop it. Do not make a face. Do not make a scene. The investors from the Meridian Group are 2 tables over. Smile. They are mocking him. Grant, I hissed back. They are just joking, Grant whispered, his voice hard. He is a big boy. He can take a joke. Do not ruin this night for me. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Dad. He was sitting perfectly still. He had not taken a bite of food. He was looking at me, and I saw the panic in my own eyes reflected in his. But he just gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't, he was saying. Don't fight them. It is not worth it. He was taking the bullets so I would not have to. Just like he always had. But Celia was not done. She was enjoying her audience too much. She reached under the table and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped gift box. Actually, Celia said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, I had a little something made for the occasion. Since we are all family here, I thought we should clarify everyone's role. To help you feel comfortable. Frank. She slid the box across the tablecloth. It stopped right in front of Dad's cracked, clean hands. Open it, she urged. Dad hesitated. Then, with agonizing slowness, he undid the ribbon. He opened the box and pulled out a linen napkin. It was high quality, heavy and white. But as he unfolded it, the embroidery became visible to everyone at the table, in elegant, gold script, right where a monogram should be. It read, "Staff." "I thought it would be a funny keepsake." Celia beamed, looking around at her friends for approval. "Just so you remember where you fit in. Frank, we would not want you getting confused with the guests." The humiliation was total. It was a physical blow. The heat in the room seemed to spike. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I started to stand up. I did not care about the investors. I did not care about the scene. I was going to flip the table. "Dad, we are leaving," I said, my voice shaking. "Now." Dad looked at the napkin. He ran his thumb over the gold thread. He did not look crushed. He looked tired. He began to fold the napkin neatly, placing it back on the table. "Isla," he said softly. "Sit down." "No, Dad. We are—" Clang. The sound was not a glass clinking. It was the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor. At the table directly behind us, an elderly man, one of the key investors Grant had been staring at all night, had collapsed. He had slumped sideways out of his chair, taking the tablecloth and half the dinner service with him. Screams erupted. The man was on his back, his face turning a terrifying shade of purple, his hands clawing at his throat before falling limp. "Oh my God! He is choking!" Someone shrieked. "He is having a seizure!" Another yelled. Pandemonium broke out. The wealthy patrons of the Marlowe atrium recoiled, scrambling backward as if death were a contagious disease. Waiters froze, staring in horror. Grant stood up, looking useless, his hands hovering in the air. Celia put a hand to her throat, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Someone call management," Celia snapped. "Get him out of here." In the middle of the chaos, a chair scraped back. It was Frank. The hesitation in his knee was gone. The slowness was gone. He moved with a speed that blurred the air. He did not walk. He launched himself toward the fallen man. Dad hit his knees beside the victim, disregarding his suit pants on the hard marble floor. He placed 2 fingers on the man's carotid artery. His head turned to listen for breath. "No pulse, no breathing," Dad barked. His voice was not the quiet, deferential tone he had used at the table. It was a command. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed. He ripped open the man's expensive dress shirt, sending mother-of-pearl buttons skittering across the floor. He located the sternum and interlocked his hands. "You!" Dad shouted, pointing a finger at a stunned waiter. "Call 911. Tell them we have a male, approximately 70 years old, in cardiac arrest. Tell them we are starting CPR. Go." The waiter ran. "You," Dad pointed at Grant. "Get back. Give me room." Grant stumbled back, looking at his father-in-law as if he had just sprouted wings. Dad began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. His form was perfect. Shoulders locked. Weight over the patient. Driving down deep and hard. It was violent and rhythmic. He was not panicking. He was working. "Isla," Dad said, not looking up, his voice steady in rhythm with the compressions. "Head tilt, chin lift, check the airway. Make sure he did not swallow his tongue." I dropped to my knees on the other side. My hands were shaking, but Dad's presence grounded me. I did what he said. "Airway is clear, Dad." "Good. Keep it open. I am doing 30 and 2. The room had gone silent. The music had stopped. The only sound in the massive atrium was the wet, heavy thud of my father forcing a stranger's heart to beat manually, and the sharp intake of his own breath. For 5 minutes, he worked. He did not sweat. He did not tire. He was a machine made of muscle and training. When the man's ribs cracked a sickening sound that made Celia gasp, Dad did not flinch. He knew that was the price of a life. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. When the paramedics burst through the doors, they were carrying a heavy go bag and a defibrillator. They rushed to the scene. "Status?" the lead paramedic shouted. Dad did not stop pumping. "Witnessed collapse. Downtime approximately 6 minutes. High-quality CPR initiated immediately. No shock advised yet. Waiting on your AED. The paramedic looked at Dad. He looked at the technique. He looked at the command in Dad's eyes. Okay, sir. Hold compressions on my count. Switch on 3. 1, 2, 3. The paramedics took over. They moved with the same efficiency Dad had. They hooked up the leads. They intubated. Within 2 minutes, they had a rhythm. We have a pulse, the paramedic called out. Weak, but it is there. A collective breath went through the room. As they loaded the man onto the stretcher, the lead paramedic turned to Dad. He saw the old suit, the scar, the sweat on his brow. He nodded respectfully. Nice work. You saved his brain. You a doctor. Dad wiped his hands on his trousers, ruining the 30-year-old suit with the dust and grime of the floor. No, he said simply. Just trained. The paramedics wheeled the stretcher out, lights flashing against the glass walls. Dad stood up. He breathed out a long, slow exhale. His limp returned instantly, his shoulders slumping slightly as the adrenaline faded. He looked at me and offered a small, tired smile. You okay, honey? I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. I was more than okay. I was looking at a giant. But the spell was broken by a voice from the table. Celia Ashford was sipping her wine again. She looked at Dad, then at the mess on the floor, and finally at the staff napkin that was still sitting on the table. Well, Celia said, her voice carrying through the silent room. I suppose that was fortunate. It proves my point. Really, it is good to have someone useful around, even if they do ruin the dinner service. She turned to Grant. Make sure they clean this floor before dessert. I looked at her. I looked at the diamond necklace resting on her neck, and then I looked at my father, who was brushing dust off his knees, his face impassive. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock turning. I walked over to the table. I picked up the staff napkin. I folded it into a small square. We are going to the hospital, I said. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. Dad wants to make sure he makes it. Isla, sit down, Grant said, his voice warning. The ambulance has him. It is over. No, Grant, I said. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and realized I was looking at a stranger. It is not over. I took Dad's arm. We walked out of the Marlowe atrium, leaving the silence and the diamonds behind us. I squeezed his arm tight. They think you are nothing, I thought, the rage burning cold and hard in my chest. They think you are a joke. I looked at the back of Dad's head as we walked toward the valet. They have no idea who just walked out of their lives. The silence inside the taxi was a violent contrast to the chaos we had just left behind. Outside the window, the city lights smeared into long, glowing streaks against the glass. But my eyes were fixed on the ambulance speeding ahead of us. Its red and white lights cut through the darkness, a rhythmic pulse that matched the thumping in my own chest. Dad was in there. He had insisted on riding with the patient, claiming he needed to hand over the vitals properly to the intake team, but I knew the truth. He went because he could not stand to be near the people who had just stripped him of his dignity for sport. I sat back against the cold leather seat and looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Not from fear, but from a sudden, terrifying clarity. It is funny how memory works. It rewrites itself to protect you. For 3 years, I had told myself a fairy tale about Grant Ashford. I told myself that the man I married was still the man I met at a coffee shop 5 years ago. That man had been kind. He had laughed with his whole face, not just his mouth. He had listened to me when I talked about my work. When we first dated, he seemed fascinated by my life, by the grit of it. He told me he loved that I was self-made. He told me he wanted to build a life that was real, not just a performance. But somewhere between the engagement ring and the wedding vows, the script changed. The Ashfords did not welcome me into their family. They acquired me. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a rescue mission. They loved to tell the story at cocktail parties, usually when I was just out of earshot. They would say they had given me a life I could never have dreamed of. They listed their generosity like line items on a tax return: the membership to the country club, the wardrobe overhaul because my professional suits were deemed too high street, the introductions to people who mattered. They acted as if they had pulled me out of a burning building, when in reality, they had just locked me in a gilded cage and thrown away the key, and the price of admission was my father. To them. Frank Dalton was not a person. He was a loose end. He was an embarrassment that needed to be managed. I remembered the fight I had with Celia 2 months before the wedding. She had sat me down in her sunroom, sipping iced tea that cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to be, and suggested so gently, so venomously, that perhaps it would be better if Dad did not walk me down the aisle. He has a limp. Darling, she had said, as if discussing a lame horse, it might ruin the symmetry of the procession, and the photos well. We want them to be timeless. I had refused. I told her if Dad did not walk me, there would be no wedding. They capitulated, but they made me pay for it. They treated him like an uninvited ghost at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday, and Grant, my husband, the man who had promised to be my partner, had slowly turned into their enforcer. Don't bring up his old job. Isla. Don't let him tell those long stories. Check his tie before he comes in. I looked at the empty seat next to me and felt a wave of nausea. I had let them do it. For 3 years. I had swallowed the insults because I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought I was protecting Dad by keeping him in the margins, by asking him to be quieter, smaller. But Frank Dalton had never been small. I closed my eyes and saw him as he was 20 years ago. I saw him coming home at 6 in the morning. His boots caked in mud or drywall dust, his eyes red-rimmed from a double shift. Mom had died when I was 4, leaving him with a mortgage, a broken heart, and a daughter who needed braces and ballet lessons. He never complained, not once. He worked as a mechanic, a construction foreman, a security guard. He did whatever kept the lights on. He never spoke about what he did before I was born. I knew he had served in the military, and I knew he had worked in emergency services. But he treated his past like a closed book. It was a different life. Izzy, he would say when I asked about the scar on his hand, or the way he instinctively scanned every room he entered. All that matters is right now. He taught me how to change a tire and how to balance a checkbook. He taught me that your word is your bond, and that respect is earned by what you do, not what you own. And tonight, watching him perform CPR on a stranger while my husband's billionaire friends cowered in fear, I realized something that made my blood run cold. My father was a king in exile, and I had allowed a pack of hyenas to laugh at him. My phone buzzed in my clutch, snapping me back to the present. I pulled it out, expecting a text from Grant. I expected him to be angry that I had left the party. I expected a lecture about optics and abandoning guests. But the screen was dark. There were no messages from my husband. Instead, there was a notification from my work email. It was odd. I never got high-priority alerts this late on a Friday unless a case was breaking. I unlocked the phone. I work for a firm called Aegis Compliance and Forensics. To the outside world, we are boring corporate consultants. To the inside world, we are the people you call when the numbers do not add up. I am a forensic auditor. My job is to look at a stack of boring financial documents and see the lies hidden in the margins. I trace intent through ink. I look for the ghost employees on payroll, the vendor invoices that go to residential addresses, the kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. I have spent 10 years learning that money leaves a trail, and that trail always leads to character. I opened the email. It was not from my boss. It was a secure drop notification from an anonymous source. The subject line was blank. The body of the message contained a single line of text. If you still think the Ashfords are clean, you have not seen the vendor files at Crownview Medical. I stared at the words. Crownview Medical. That was the hospital the ambulance was heading to right now. It was the premier trauma center in the city. It was also, I suddenly remembered, a place the Ashfords had been talking about obsessively for the last 6 months. My mind started to race, my auditor's brain kicking into gear. Overriding the emotional wife, I started connecting dots I had been too blind to see before. Grant had been acting strange lately. It was subtle, the kind of thing you miss if you are not looking for it. He was shorter with his temper. He was constantly checking his encrypted messaging apps. And then there were the papers. For the last 3 weeks, Grant had been pushing a stack of documents in front of me every chance he got. At breakfast, before bed, even as I was rushing out the door to work. Just standard stuff. "Babe," he would say, flashing that smile that did not quite reach his eyes anymore. "Dad is restructuring some of the family trusts for tax purposes. We need your signature to clear the spousal conflict clauses. It is just a formality." I had not signed them yet. Not because I was suspicious, but because I was busy. I had tossed them on the desk in my home office, promising to get to them over the weekend. But now, thinking about it, I remembered the urgency in his voice yesterday. I really need those by Monday. Isla, Dad is breathing down my neck. And then there was the money. The Ashfords lived loud. They drove cars that cost $200,000 and took vacations that cost $500,000. But recently, I had noticed things, small things. A credit card of Grant's had been declined at dinner last week. He laughed it off as a fraud alert, but he had looked panicked for a split second. Celia had fired her longtime housekeeper, claiming the woman was stealing. But I knew that housekeeper was loyal to a fault. Maybe she just wanted her paycheck. Wealth is often a performance, and the Ashfords were excellent actors. But if you work in forensics long enough, you learn that the loudest performers are usually the ones trying to distract you from the fact that the stage is burning down. The taxi slowed as we approached the emergency bay of Crownview Medical Center. The ambulance had already parked, its back doors open. I saw the paramedics unloading the stretcher, and there was Dad. He was jogging alongside the gurney, his hand resting on the side rail. Under the harsh halogen lights of the hospital bay, he looked different. The soft, patient father I knew was gone. In his place was a man carved out of granite. His jaw was set tight, his eyes focused forward. He was not looking around with the wonder of a tourist. He was scanning the perimeter, checking the doors, assessing the environment. He looked like he owned the place, or maybe he looked like he was returning to a battlefield he knew better than anyone else. I paid the driver, tipping him $20 because I did not have the energy to wait for change. I stepped out into the cool night air, the smell of antiseptic and exhaust fumes hitting me. I looked at my phone again, reading that anonymous message one more time. Crownview Medical. My father was walking into that hospital to save a life. My husband's family had some deep, dark connection to that hospital that someone wanted me to know about. And Grant was desperate for me to sign legal documents that would bind me to his family's finances forever. A cold shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had spent my career taking down corrupt CEOs, embezzling CFOs, and money-laundering politicians. I was good at it. I was ruthless when I had to be. But I had always left that part of me at the door when I came home. I wanted to be a wife, not an investigator. I wanted to be loved, not feared. But tonight, standing on the pavement, watching the doors slide shut behind my father, I realized the time for being a wife was over. The Ashfords had made a fatal mistake. They thought they had married a passive girl who would look pretty in photos and sign whatever they put in front of her. They thought they had humiliated a helpless old man who would just take it. They did not know that Frank Dalton was a hero. And they definitely did not know that Isla Coleman was the best forensic auditor in the state. I gripped my phone tight, my knuckles turning white. I walked toward the automatic doors of the emergency room. I was not just walking into a hospital to check on my father. I was walking into a crime scene. I did not know that night was the night they walked into the audit of their lives. The automatic doors of Crownview Medical Center slid open with a sharp hiss, and the controlled chaos of the emergency room swallowed us whole. It was a sensory assault, the acrid smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, and the low, urgent hum of voices speaking in a language that meant life or death. I had arrived just seconds behind the ambulance, having sprinted from the taxi while the driver was still printing the receipt. My father was already halfway down the corridor, moving alongside the stretcher that carried the elderly man from the party. Dad was not just a bystander tagging along. He was an active participant in the transport. His hand was on the oxygen bag, squeezing it with a precise, measured rhythm that matched the count he was muttering under his breath. "Clear the bay," a doctor shouted, rushing to meet them. "What do we have?" "Males, 72. Witnessed cardiac arrest," Dad answered instantly. His voice cut through the noise, clear and authoritative. He did not sound like the man who had been silently folding a napkin 10 minutes ago. He sounded like a general. "Downtime approximately 6 minutes. CPR initiated immediately. 1 shock delivered by EMS in transit. He is in sinus tachycardia now, but his pressure is soft, 80/40. The doctor, a harried-looking man in blue scrubs with a stethoscope around his neck, did not even question who the old man in the ill-fitting suit was. He just nodded, accepting the data as gospel. "Okay, let's get him to Trauma 1. Move." They swept the stretcher through a set of double doors, and for a moment, Dad moved to follow them. Then, he stopped. He knew the line. He knew exactly where the public space ended and the sterile zone began. He let go of the gurney, stepped back, and watched them go. His chest heaving slightly from the exertion, I ran up to him, grabbing his arm. "Dad, are you okay?" He looked at me, his eyes still dilated with adrenaline. "I am fine. Izzy. He has a good chance. They got him there fast enough." Before I could answer, the revolving doors at the entrance spun aggressively, and the Ashford invasion force arrived. Warren and Celia Ashford strode into the waiting room as if they were arriving at a board meeting they intended to hostile takeover. Grant trailed behind them, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, checking his phone nervously. "Where is the administrator?" Warren demanded, marching up to the triage nurse who was busy typing on a computer. "My name is Warren Ashford. A guest from my party was just brought in. I want to ensure he is getting the best care. I want a private room, and I want the chief of medicine down here immediately." The nurse, a young woman who looked like she had been on her feet for 12 hours, barely looked up. "Sir, you need to step back. The doctors are with the patient. Take a seat." "I do not think you heard me," Warren said, his voice dropping an octave, the tone he used to intimidate junior executives. "I am a platinum donor to this hospital's foundation. I can have your job by morning." "Warren, please," Celia hissed, scanning the crowded waiting room with a look of disgust. It was filled with regular people, a mother rocking a crying baby, a construction worker holding a bloody towel to his hand, a teenager looking pale. Celia pulled her fur wrap tighter around her shoulders, as if poverty were airborne. "Keep your voice down. We do not want a scene. Grant, stand in front of me. I do not want anyone snapping a photo of us in a place like this." Grant moved to shield his mother, looking at me with pleading eyes. "Isla, get your father to sit down. He looks frantic. He is making people stare." I turned to look at Dad. He was not frantic. He was standing near the wall, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loose, and there was a smear of dust on his jacket from the floor of the venue. But he was not making people stare because he looked messy. He was making people stare because he was watching the trauma bay doors with an intensity that was magnetic. Suddenly, the double doors to the trauma area swung open. A nurse walked out, a formidable woman in her 50s, with graying hair tied back in a severe bun and arms that looked like they could lift an engine block. She was stripping off a pair of bloody gloves. She looked at the triage desk, about to shout an order, when her eyes swept over the room and landed on my father. She froze. Her mouth opened slightly. She took a step forward, blinking as if she were seeing a ghost. "No," she whispered. The word was barely audible, but in the sudden lull of the waiting room, it carried, "It cannot be." Dad looked up. He saw her. A slow, warm smile broke across his tired face. "Hello, Margaret. You are still running this floor. I see." The nurse let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Mr. Dalton." "It has been a while," Dad said softly. "A while," she repeated, her voice rising. It has been 8 years. Frank. At the sound of his name, another head popped up from behind the nursing station. Then a resident doctor walking by with a chart stopped in his tracks. "Frank?" the resident asked, squinting. "Frank Dalton." Warren Ashford turned around, looking annoyed. "Excuse me, we are trying to get an update on a patient. If the staff could focus on their jobs instead of chatting with the janitorial staff, that would be appreciated." The nurse named Margaret turned her head slowly to look at Warren. Her eyes were like flint. "Sir, I suggest you be quiet." "Excuse me," Celia gasped. "Do you know who we are?" "I do not care who you are," Margaret snapped. She turned back to my father, ignoring the billionaires completely. "Sir, the captain is here," she called out to someone in the back. The atmosphere in the hallway shifted instantly. It was electric. The double doors swung open again, and a tall man walked out. He was wearing a long white coat with Chief of Emergency Medicine embroidered on the pocket. He had silver hair and the posture of a man who had seen everything. He was walking fast, looking at a clipboard, until he heard the murmur running through his staff. He looked up. He saw Frank Dalton standing there in his dirty, old suit. The Chief of Medicine stopped. He dropped the clipboard to his side. He did not smile. He did not wave. He straightened his back, bringing his heels together with a sharp, audible click. And then, right there in the middle of the busy emergency room, the Chief of Medicine raised his right hand to his brow. He saluted my father. It was not a casual wave. It was a sharp, military-grade salute, held with rigid perfection. "Sir," the chief said. His voice was thick with emotion. "At ease, Dr. Evans," Dad said, his voice gentle. "You are making a scene, Doctor." Evans lowered his hand but did not relax his posture. "I thought you retired to Florida, sir. We haven't seen you since the pileup on I-90. "I am still around," Dad said, shifting his weight off his bad knee. "Just keeping a low profile." By now, the corridor had stopped moving. 2 orderlies pushing an empty gurney had stopped. 3 other nurses had come out of the break room. When they saw who was standing there, the reaction was identical. They straightened up. Shoulders went back. Chins went up. It was a ripple effect, one by one. The people in scrubs, the people the Ashfords had spent all night mocking as the help, were standing at attention for the man wearing the staff napkin in his pocket. Celia looked around, her eyes wide with genuine confusion. "What is happening?" she whispered, clutching her pearls. "Why are they saluting him? Is this a hospital or a barracks?" Dr. Evans heard her. He turned, his gaze cold and clinical as he dissected the Ashfords. "Madam, this man is not just him. This is Commander Frank Dalton." "Commander," Grant repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "He used to fix cars. He was the lead training officer for the Profound Disaster Response Unit of the United States Army Medical Corps," Dr. Evans said, his voice ringing with authority. "And after he retired from service, he spent 15 years running the emergency response coordination for this entire city. He wrote the triage protocols we still use today. He trained me. He trained Margaret. He trained half the people in this building how to keep people alive when the world is falling apart." The doctor stepped closer to the Ashfords, looming over them. "You might see an old man in a cheap suit. We see the man who pulled 30 people out of the subway collapse in '98 with his bare hands. We see the man who stayed in the biocontainment unit for 3 days straight during the outbreak scare so his junior staff wouldn't have to." I stood there, my hand covering my mouth. I knew Dad had been in the service. I knew he had been a first responder, but he had never told me this. He had never told me he was a legend. "He never mentioned it," I whispered. "Dr." Evans looked at me, his expression softening. "He wouldn't. Frank Dalton never took credit for anything. He used to say that if you have to tell people you are in charge, you are not really in charge." The doctor turned back to Dad. "The patient you brought in the senator—" "Investor," Warren corrected automatically, though he looked pale. "He is stable," Dr. Evans said to Dad, ignoring Warren. Because the CPR was perfect. You saved his brain function. Frank, again. Good, Dad said simply. That is good. Celia looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. She tried to rally, tried to find some way to regain the high ground. Well, she sniffed, it is nice that he has hobbies, but really, all this standing around is very unprofessional. We are paying for service, not a reunion. For the first time all night, Dad looked at Celia, really looked at her. He did not look angry. He looked at her with a profound, crushing pity. These people are not your servants. Mrs. Ashford, Dad said quietly, they are the only thing standing between you and the grave. You would do well to remember that. He turned to the wall of medical staff who were still watching him with reverence. As you were, he said softly, like a spell breaking. The room moved again, but the dynamic had shifted tectonically. The nurses who walked past us did not look at the Ashfords with the deferential fear they usually reserved for donors. They looked at them with cold indifference, but when they looked at Dad, they smiled. They nodded. One nurse slipped a bottle of water into his hand as she passed. I looked at Grant. My husband was standing near the triage desk. He was looking at my father, and then he looked at me. For 3 years, I had seen many expressions on Grant's face: arrogance, boredom, amusement, irritation. But as he watched the chief of medicine shake my father's hand like a brother, I saw something new. Grant Ashford was terrified. He was looking at Frank Dalton not as a liability, but as a threat. He was realizing that the man they had mocked, the man they had treated as a disposable prop, commanded a loyalty that the Ashford millions could not buy, and worse, he was realizing that I was seeing it too. Grant walked over to me, his voice a frantic whisper. Isla, we should go. The investor is fine. We don't need to be here. This is becoming a spectacle. No, Grant, I said, my voice steady. I moved to stand next to my father, linking my arm through his. We are staying. Dad wants to make sure the patient is fully stabilized, and frankly, I feel safer here with him than I do anywhere near you right now. Grant flinched as if I had slapped him. He looked at the doctors, at the nurses, at the security guard who was now eyeing the Ashfords with suspicion. He realized he was outnumbered. Fine, Grant muttered, backing away. Fine, but do not expect us to wait all night. I expect nothing from you, Grant, I said. Not anymore. I turned my back on my husband and looked at my father. He was chatting with Dr. Evans, asking about the new portable ultrasound machines. He looked tired. Yes, his leg was hurting him. I could see the tremor in his thigh. But he stood tall. The Ashfords had spent the evening trying to prove they were the elite. But here, in the harsh light of the hospital corridor, surrounded by the reality of blood and breath, their diamonds looked like cheap glass. I squeezed Dad's arm. Why didn't you tell them? I whispered. Why did you let them treat you like that? Dad looked down at me. Because, honey, he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. A lion does not need to roar to prove he is a lion. He just has to wait for the hyenas to make a mistake. He looked over my shoulder at Grant, who was huddled in the corner with his parents, whispering frantically. And I think, Dad added, they just made a very big mistake. The air in the waiting room had changed. Before the salute, the atmosphere had been thick with the sterile boredom of a Friday night emergency room. Now, it was charged with a restless, whispering energy. News travels fast in a hospital, faster than a virus. It moves through the nurses' station, down the corridors, and into the waiting areas, carried by orderlies and residents. By the time Dad sat back down, awkwardly adjusting his stiff leg, the whispers had reached the general public. A woman sitting 3 rows away, clutching a rosary, leaned forward. She had been crying earlier, but now she was squinting at my father. Excuse me, she said, her voice trembling. Are you the man who coordinated the flood response back in 2012? The one who kept the levees from breaking? Dad looked up, surprised. I was part of the team, ma'am. Part of the team, she scoffed gently, shaking her head. You organized the sandbag line. My husband was a volunteer. He said you didn't sleep for 48 hours. You carried my brother to dry land when the water hit the lower ward. Dad gave a small, uncomfortable nod. I hope your family is doing well now. Because of you. We are, she said. She looked at the Ashfords, who were standing nearby in their tuxedos and gowns, and then she looked back at Dad in his worn suit. Her expression made it clear who she thought the important person in the room was. I saw Celia Ashford's eyes narrow. She was watching this exchange not with shame, but with a terrifying kind of calculation. The wheels were turning behind her Botoxed forehead. She did not like being outshone, but she hated missing an opportunity even more. She grabbed my elbow. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into the silk of my dress. She steered me toward the vending machines, away from the prying ears of the commoners. Isla, she hissed, her voice low and sharp. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? Celia. That my father is a good man, I asked, pulling my arm away. Don't play coy with me, she snapped, checking her reflection in the glass of the snack machine. That he has status, that he is a local hero. Do you have any idea how bad this looks for us? We treated him like a servant, and it turns out he is practically a saint in this city. I stared at her, incredulous. You are worried about how it looks. I am worried about leverage. Isla, she said, smoothing her hair. We are trying to secure the naming rights for the new pediatric wing here. Do you know how much easier that negotiation would be if we had known your father was the former emergency coordinator? We could have used him. The word hung in the air between us. Used, not honored, not respected. Used. Next time, Celia said, adjusting her diamond earring. Brief me properly. If I had known he was a somebody, I would have had him seated next to the hospital board chairman at dinner. We can spin this. We can say we were being humble. Yes, that is it. We respect his modesty. She walked away before I could scream, leaving me shaking with rage next to a machine dispensing stale chips. She was already rewriting history. The humiliation at the dinner table was being edited out of the script, replaced by a narrative where the Ashfords were the benevolent patrons of a humble hero. I walked back to the seating area. Warren Ashford was now standing over my father. 10 minutes ago, Warren wouldn't have pissed on Dad if he was on fire. Now, he was leaning in, offering a smile that looked like a shark baring its teeth. Frank, Warren said, his voice booming with false camaraderie. I was just telling Grant. It is remarkable how small this world is. I had no idea you were that Frank Dalton. You know, I have always had a deep respect for our first responders. Dad looked up at Warren. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just looked at him with the flat, unimpressed gaze of a man who has seen bodies pulled out of wreckages and knows what real tragedy looks like. Is that so, Mr. Ashford? Dad asked. Please, call me Warren, my father-in-law insisted, chuckling. We are family, after all. Listen, once we get out of here, I would love to pick your brain. We are looking at some security contracts for our warehouses, and a man with your pedigree could be very useful as a consultant. We could talk numbers, substantial numbers. It was a bribe. It was a blatant, clumsy attempt to buy Dad's silence and his reputation in one transaction. Dad shifted his weight. I am retired, Warren, and I don't consult for companies I haven't vetted. Warren's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. Well, of course, due diligence. I admire that. I watched them, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. They were circling him. They realized they had kicked a hornet's nest, and now they were trying to buy the honey, but it was Grant who made my skin crawl the most. He had seen the nurses watching us. He had seen the way the staff looked at Dad with adoration and at the Ashfords with suspicion. So, he decided to play the role of the century. He came up to me, his face arranged in a mask of deep concern. Honey, he said, loud enough for the triage nurse to hear. You look exhausted. Can I get you anything water, coffee? I just want to make sure you are okay. This has been such a traumatic night for you. He reached out to rub my back. His hand felt like a cold, dead weight. I am fine, Grant, I said, stepping out of his reach. I know, he said, stepping closer, refusing to let me create distance. I am so proud of your dad. Really, it is amazing. We should have a barbecue next weekend. Have him over. I want to get to know him better. I looked at him. This was the man who, 3 hours ago, had told me to tell my father not to use the wrong fork. You had 3 years to get to know him. Grant, I said quietly. Grant's eyes flashed with annoyance, but he kept the smile plastered on his face. I know, babe, and I regret that. Life gets so busy. But we can change that. We can fix it. He wasn't trying to fix our marriage. He was trying to fix his public relations problem. I turned away from him, needing to breathe. I walked toward the reception desk to ask for an update on the patient, just to have something to do. That was when I saw it. Celia was standing at the far end of the counter, near the administrative office door. She was talking to a woman in a business suit, not a nurse, not a doctor, an administrator. The woman looked nervous. She was holding a thick manila envelope. Celia looked around, checking the corridor, but she didn't look at me. She assumed I was still being managed by Grant. I saw Celia reach into her clutch and pull out a smaller white envelope. It was the kind you put a check in. She slid it across the counter. The administrator took it, slid it under a clipboard, and pushed the manila envelope toward Celia. The exchange took 3 seconds. It was smooth, practiced. Celia slipped the manila envelope into her oversized designer bag and patted it, smiling that tight, shark-like smile. My heart hammered against my ribs. I work in forensic accounting. I know what a transaction looks like. I know what a bribe looks like. And I know that you do not exchange paperwork with hospital administration at 11 o'clock on a Friday night unless you are trying to bury something before Monday morning. I stepped back into the shadow of a pillar. A young man in a shirt and tie walked past me, looking harried. He was carrying a stack of files. He dropped one. I knelt to help him pick it up. Long night? I asked. He sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. You have no idea. The board ordered a surprise audit of the vendor contracts. Everyone is scrambling. We have to pull every invoice from the last 12 months before the external auditors arrive on Monday. I froze. External auditors? He nodded, grabbing the file from my hand. Some firm called Aegis, supposed to be sharks. If there is a single receipt missing, heads are going to roll. Aegis, that was my firm. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The Ashfords were desperate to get me to sign papers. They were making secret donations in the middle of the night. Grant was terrified of me looking at their finances, and now, my own firm was being sent in to tear this place apart. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. It was a call from a number I knew by heart. It was Jonathan Vance, the senior partner at Aegis, my boss. I looked at Grant. He was still performing for the room, pretending to listen to one of Dad's war stories while checking his watch behind his back. He had no idea. I answered the phone. This is Isla. Coleman. Vance's voice was gravelly and direct. I know it is late. I need to know where you are. I am at a hospital, I said, keeping my voice even. I hope everything is okay, Vance said, skipping the pleasantries. I need you to clear your schedule. We just got triggered on a high-risk compliance check. It is big. Isla, political, messy. I need my best eye on the ink. Where is the site? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Crown View Medical Center, Vance said. We have a whistleblower alleging massive kickbacks involving a facilities contractor. The contractor is a holding company called Ashford Enterprises. I know the name is the same as your husband's. So I need to ask, are you conflicted out? Or can you be objective? I looked across the waiting room. I saw Celia clutching her bag with the bought and paid for documents inside. I saw Warren trying to hustle my father for a security consultation he didn't need. I saw Grant, the man I had loved, The man who had stood by and watched his family treat my father like a dog, now trying to use that same man as a shield for his reputation. They weren't family. They were targets. "I am not conflicted, Jonathan," I said into the phone. My voice was cold, steady, and sharp as a scalpel. "I have never been more objective in my life." "Good," Vance said. "You are the lead. We need to move fast. If they know we are coming, they will try to shred the paper trail." "They won't be able to," I said, my eyes fixed on Grant's back. "Because I am already inside the building." "What?" "I am on site," I said. "At Crownview. I can secure the initial data right now." There was a pause on the line. Then Vance chuckled darkly. "God, you are terrifying. Coleman, go get them." I hung up the phone. The sadness I had felt earlier was gone. The embarrassment was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard clarity of the audit. I opened my secure messaging app. I typed a message to the forensic IT team at Aegis. Subject priority retrieval. Crownview Medical. Message: I need full access to all vendor contracts associated with Ashford Enterprises and its subsidiaries for the last 6 months. Cross-reference with the signatory Grant Ashford. Do it now. I hit send. I slipped the phone back into my purse and walked back toward my husband. "Who was that?" Grant asked, looking up. "Work. Just a wrong number." I lied, smiling at him. It was the first time I had lied to him in our marriage. It felt surprisingly easy. "Grant, I was thinking maybe you are right. Maybe we should look at those papers you wanted me to sign. The ones for the family trust." Grant's face lit up with relief. "Really? That would be amazing. Babe, I have them in the car. We could do it tonight." "Let's not rush," I said soothingly. "But definitely soon. I want to make sure I understand exactly what I'm signing." He grabbed my hand, squeezing it. "You are the best. I knew you would come around. We are a team. Right?" "Right," I said. "A team." I looked over his shoulder at the staff sign above the nurses' station. The Ashfords had spent all night trying to label my father. They wanted to put people in boxes. They wanted to define who mattered and who served. Well, I was about to show them exactly what the help could do. "Dad," I called out. Frank looked up from his conversation with Warren. "Are you ready?" I asked. "I think we have seen enough here." Dad looked at me. He saw the shift in my posture. He saw the set of my jaw. He didn't know exactly what had happened, but he knew his daughter. He knew that look. It was the same look he had when he was assessing a structural collapse. He stood up, ignoring Warren mid-sentence. "Yes," Dad said. "I am ready." We walked toward the exit. The Ashfords followed. Assuming they were leading the parade, they didn't know they were walking into a trap. They didn't know that the person they should have been afraid of wasn't the man with the scar on his hand. It was the woman with the calculator in her head. Dr. Evans had insisted that my father stay for observation. He argued that a man in his 60s who performs high-intensity CPR for 6 minutes straight needs to have his own heart checked, regardless of how stubborn he is. They had set Dad up in a private room on the 4th floor, away from the chaos of the ER. He was sitting up in bed, the monitors humming a steady, rhythmic beat beside him. He looked tired, the adrenaline from the party finally draining away to leave him pale. But his eyes were sharp. They darted around the room, cataloging every detail, every exit, every face. When I closed the door to the hallway, shutting out the noise, Dad beckoned me closer. "Isla," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Do not argue with them in here. Just watch. People tell you who they are when they think they are in control. Let them show you." I nodded, pulling a chair close to his bedside. "I am watching. Dad, I promise." 10 minutes later, the door pushed open. It was not a nurse. Celia walked in, followed closely by Grant and Warren. The transformation was unsettling. Downstairs in the lobby, they had been panicked and defensive. Now, in the privacy of the patient room, they had recomposed themselves into a tableau of benevolence. Celia was carrying a basket of fruit that was so large it looked comical, wrapped in yellow cellophane that crinkled loudly in the quiet room. "Frank," Celia cooed, placing the basket on the rolling table. "We just wanted to make sure you were comfortable. I had this sent up from the gift shop. You need your strength." "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford," Dad said. He did not look at the fruit. He looked at her hands. "Please, call me Celia," she insisted, flashing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We are all family here, and because we are family, we want to make sure everything is handled properly. We do not want you worrying about administrative nonsense while you recover." She reached into her oversized designer tote and pulled out a blue folder. "I spoke to the hospital administrator," she continued, her voice breezy. "They said the paperwork can be a nightmare. So, being the proactive in-laws we are, we had our team draw up the standard admission and release forms for you. It will save you waiting for a social worker." She handed the folder to me, not Dad. "Isla, darling, just get him to sign the tabs. We can file it for him." I took the folder. The weight of it felt wrong. Standard hospital admission forms are usually on cheap, flimsy paper, printed in bulk. These documents were on thick, high-bond linen paper, the kind lawyers use. I opened it. The top page was a standard HIPAA release, but underneath that, clipped innocuously to the back, was a document titled Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare and Asset Management. My auditor's eye scanned the text. It was dense, filled with legal jargon designed to bore the reader into submission. But I did not get bored. I got suspicious. I skipped the preamble and went straight to the authority clauses. Clause 4. 1. The agent shall have full authority to make medical decisions in the event of incapacitation. That was standard. Clause 4.2. The agent shall have the power to access, manage, and liquidate any and all compensatory funds, settlements, or retroactive payments due to the principal from any medical institution or associated entity. I froze. "Grant," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What is this?" Grant stepped forward, putting a hand on my shoulder. "It is just a standard proxy. Isla, you know how hospitals are. If Dad has a reaction to a medication, or God forbid something happens, you need the authority to handle his billing and insurance. It just protects him. This allows the signee to liquidate assets," I said, tapping the paper. "Why would I need to liquidate my father's assets to treat a heart murmur?" "It is boilerplate language," Grant said, his smile tightening. "Legal just uses a template. Don't overthink it. Babe, just get him to sign so we can go home. It is late." "No," I said. I closed the folder. "We will use the hospital's forms. I do not sign templates I have not read thoroughly." Warren Ashford, who had been leaning against the windowsill looking out at the parking lot, turned around. The friendly mask he had worn downstairs was gone. In its place was the face of a man who was used to getting his way and was losing patience with a subordinate. "You are being difficult, Isla," Warren said. His voice was deep and rumbling. "We are trying to help. Your father is a man of limited means. If complications arise, the costs could be astronomical. We are offering to put the full weight of the Ashford estate behind his care, but we need the legal standing to do it. If you refuse, and something goes wrong, who takes responsibility?" "You." "I am his daughter," I said, standing up. "I take responsibility." "And what is your collateral?" Warren sneered. "Your salary." "Please, 1 week in the ICU would bankrupt you." "That is enough," Dad said from the bed. Before Dad could continue, there was a knock on the door. It opened before anyone said "come in." A man in a sharp gray suit entered. He was holding a leather briefcase. I recognized him immediately. It was Julian Sterling, the head of legal counsel for Ashford Enterprises. "Mr. Ashford," Sterling said, nodding to Warren. "I brought the supplemental files you asked for." I looked from the lawyer to my husband. "You called your corporate lawyer to the hospital." "At 1 a.m. "He was in the neighborhood," Grant lied. It was such a lazy lie that it was almost insulting. "This is not a hospital visit," I said, my voice rising. This is an ambush. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not hide what I was doing. I opened the voice memo app and hit the big red record button. I held the phone up, creating a barrier between me and them. I am recording this interaction, I announced, for the protection of all parties. State your business. Mr. Sterling, why are you presenting my father with asset management papers? Sterling paused, his hand hovering over his briefcase. He looked at Warren for guidance. Lawyers are like sharks. They know when there is blood in the water, but they also know when there is a harpoon pointed at them. Mrs. Coleman, Sterling said smoothly, there is no need for hostility. We are simply facilitating. I am not signing anything, Dad said. He pushed himself up in the bed. He looked small against the white pillows, but his voice was iron. He looked straight at Warren. I may be old, Warren, and I may be poor by your standards, but I am not stupid. You people have spent 3 years ignoring me. You wouldn't cross the street to spit on me if I was on fire. Now, suddenly, you want power of attorney. You want access to my records. Dad leaned forward. What do you want? What is in those records that you are so afraid of? Warren's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his silk tie. He stepped away from the window, invading Dad's personal space. We are trying to ensure you get what you are owed, Frank, Warren snapped. There is a compensation fund opening up next month for former employees of Crownview who were exposed to the '98 renovation asbestos. We know you are on the claimant list. We are trying to make sure you don't fumble the payout because you are too proud to hire a real lawyer. The room went silent. I looked at Dad. He looked confused. I never filed a claim for asbestos. You are eligible, Warren said fast. Too fast. Whatever. It is a class action. We just wanted to manage the trust for you so you don't get taken advantage of by predatory firms. A compensation fund, I repeated slowly. For asbestos? I looked at Grant. He was looking at the floor. Dad, I said, keeping the phone steady. Did you know about a fund? No, Dad said. And I was the safety officer during the '98 renovation. There was no asbestos. I signed off on the abatement myself. It was clean. The air left the room. If there was no asbestos, there was no fund. And if there was no fund, Warren was lying. Get out, I said. Isla, Grant started. Get out, I shouted. All of you, get out of this room before I call security and have you removed. Dad is the hero of this hospital tonight. Who do you think the guards will listen to? Warren glared at me with pure venom. He snatched the blue folder from my hand. You are making a mistake, girl. A very expensive mistake, he signaled to Sterling and Celia. They swept out of the room, a storm of expensive perfume and fury. Grant lingered for a second. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Isla, please. You don't understand the pressure we are under. Go, I said. He left, closing the door behind him. I stood there, my heart pounding in my throat. I looked at Dad. Asbestos? Dad asked, shaking his head. That is a lie. That project was the cleanest job I ever ran. We came in under budget and ahead of schedule. They aren't after an asbestos payout, Dad, I said. They are after your signature. They needed you to sign that power of attorney so they could control something attached to your name. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened my phone again. I had ignored the notifications while the Ashfords were in the room, but now I saw that the data request I had sent to the Aegis IT team had been completed. The subject line read, Search complete Ashford ENT, Crownview vendor XREF. I opened the file. It was a spreadsheet, dense with numbers. But the forensic team had already flagged the anomalies in bright red. I scrolled past the supply costs. I scrolled past the consulting fees, and then I stopped. There was a recurring payment, initiated 6 months ago. It was listed under a shell company called Apex Strategic Solutions. The signatory on the hospital side was a former administrator who had been fired last week. The beneficiary on the receiving end was a subsidiary of Ashford Enterprises. But it was the memo line on the original contract that made my blood run cold. It wasn't for asbestos removal. It wasn't for construction. The contract was for retroactive consulting safety certification, and the name listed as the required certifying officer, the person whose credentials were legally necessary to unlock the government grant money for the entire project, was written in plain block letters. Frank Dalton. I looked up at my father. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, "did you ever sign a safety certification for the Ashfords? For a new wing?" "No," he said. "I haven't signed a safety cert in 10 years. "Well," I said, turning the phone so he could see the screen. "According to this, you are the primary safety consultant for a $20 million government grant that the Ashfords just secured." They had forged his name. They had used his old credentials, his reputation, and his license number to bypass safety inspections and secure millions in federal funding. And the papers they wanted him to sign tonight, the power of attorney. It wasn't to help him. It was to retroactively authorize them to act in his name, to make the forgery legal before the auditors arrived on Monday. They weren't just greedy, they were felons. I looked at the red text on the screen, Kickback Facilities Contract Ashford. "They didn't just insult you, Dad," I whispered. "They stole your identity." Dad looked at the screen. His face hardened. The tired old man was gone. The commander was back. "Well then," Dad said, leaning back against the pillows, "if I am their consultant, maybe it is time I did an inspection." I did not go home to change. I did not go home to sleep. At 3 a.m, I walked into the vacant conference room on the 6th floor of Crown View Medical Center, where the rapid response team from Aegis had set up their war room. I had swapped my silk evening gown for a set of scrubs I borrowed from a sympathetic nurse, and I had washed the heavy makeup off my face in a public restroom. The Isla Ashford who attended galas was gone. Isla Coleman, the lead auditor, was clocked in. My team was already there. 3 analysts and a forensic data specialist named Marcus. They looked up when I entered. They did not ask why I was wearing scrubs or why I was already in the building. They knew the reputation of the assignment. High priority, high risk. "What do we have?" I asked, dispensing with greetings. Marcus projected a flowchart onto the smartboard. It looked like a spider web spun by a drunk spider. "It is a mess, boss," Marcus said, tapping his tablet. "We are looking at the facility's renovation budget, specifically the seismic retrofitting project funded by the federal grant. The total grant was for $25 million. So far, $18 million has been disbursed." "Where did it go?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of black coffee that tasted like battery acid. "Everywhere and nowhere," Marcus said. "We have invoices from 6 different subcontractors, but look at the addresses." He zoomed in. "This one, Titan Construction, is listed at a P.O. box in a strip mall in Nevada. This one, Blue Sky Logistics, tracks back to a residential address in the suburbs that, according to Google Earth, is an empty lot. They are ghost companies. Isla, they are billing for materials steel beams, medical-grade concrete, HVAC filtration units that do not exist." "Show me the approval chain," I said. Marcus swiped the screen. A digital paper trail appeared. "That is the weird part. The purchase orders are being generated by the hospital's procurement department, but they are being flagged as emergency expedited. That allows them to bypass the standard 3-bid competitive process. Someone on the inside is forcing these through." "I need a name," I said. "We have a whistleblower," one of the analysts said. "His name is Gary. He is a purchasing manager. He has been hiding in his office since he sent the tip. He agreed to talk, but only to the lead." "Bring him in," I said. 10 minutes later, Gary sat across from me. He was a small man with thinning hair and sweat stains on his collar. He was shaking. "I didn't steal anything," Gary said, his voice cracking. "You have to believe me. I just signed the papers. They told me if I didn't sign, I would be fired for incompetence. They said they had friends on the board." "Who is they, Gary?" I asked softly. I pushed a bottle of water toward him. "You are not in trouble if you help us. We follow the money, not the messenger. Who made you sign the expedited orders for materials that never arrived?" Gary looked at the door, as if expecting a hit squad to burst in. Then he looked at me. "The external consultants," he whispered. "The people from Ashford Enterprises. They have an office on the admin floor. They said it was a turnkey project. They handled the vendors. I just had to stamp the invoices received." "Did you ever see the materials?" I asked. "No," Gary said. "I asked once, about the steel reinforcements for the East Wing. I asked when the trucks were coming. The consultant laughed at me. He said the steel was conceptual for now, but the billing cycle was real." I felt a cold rage settling in my stomach. Conceptual steel. They were billing the government for imaginary safety features in a hospital full of sick people. "Who signed off on the final payment releases?" I asked. "Gary, you can generate a PO, but you cannot authorize a check over $50,000. Who signed the checks?" Gary swallowed hard. "I can show you." He opened his laptop and logged into the secure procurement server. He pulled up a scanned image of the most recent payment authorization. It was for $240,000, payable to Apex Strategic Solutions. I looked at the signature line at the bottom. It was a digital signature, authenticated by a unique key. It was a loop I had seen 1,000 times. I had seen it on our marriage license. I had seen it on birthday cards. I had seen it on the credit card receipts for dinners I wasn't invited to. Grant Ashford. The signature was bold, confident, and utterly damning. My husband wasn't just a passive beneficiary of his family's wealth. He wasn't just a weak man who let his mother bully him. He was the authorized signatory. He was the hand that turned the key to rob this hospital. I stared at the screen for a long time. The team watched me, sensing the shift in the room. But they did not know the personal grenade that had just gone off in my chest. They just saw a lead auditor analyzing evidence. "Print it," I said. My voice did not shake. "Print all of them." I left the team to collate the data and walked back down to the 4th floor. The hospital was quiet now. The witching hour before dawn. I entered Dad's room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. The monitors beeped softly, a reassuring rhythm in the darkness. "You should be sleeping," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "I can't," Dad said. He didn't look at me. "I keep thinking about the '98 renovation, the one Warren mentioned." I walked over to the bed. "What about it?" "I didn't just work here. Isla," Dad said quietly. "I was the director of safety compliance. I had a good job, a desk job. It meant I could be home with you in the evenings." He turned his head to look at me. His eyes were sad. "I quit that job because of Warren Ashford. Back then, he was just a contractor. He wanted to use substandard insulation in the pediatric ward. It was cheaper. He offered me $5,000 to look the other way during the inspection." "What did you do?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "I reported him to the board," Dad said. "Or I tried to. The next day, my office was packed up. They told me my position had been eliminated due to budget cuts. They blackballed me. Isla, that is why I went back to turning wrenches. That is why we struggled. Because I wouldn't let them put poison in the walls." I took his hand. It was rough and warm. "He held a grudge for 20 years, Dad whispered. "And now he is back, doing the same thing. But this time, he is using my name to do it." My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Celia. "Isla, darling, I hope you are resting. Just checking in. Did you manage to find Frank's personal file? We are so worried about his memory. If he has any old papers, we should really secure them for safekeeping. Let me know." She wasn't worried about his memory. She was terrified that he had kept copies of the reports from 20 years ago. She was terrified that the man she mocked as a driver was actually the only witness to her family's original sin. "They are scared. Dad," I said. "They aren't scared because they think you are clumsy. They are scared because they think you have a memory." I squeezed his hand. "Get some sleep. I have to finish something." I walked out of the room. I didn't go back to the conference room. Instead, I went to the security office in the basement. I flashed my Aegis credentials. The night guard, a bored man watching a bank of screens, barely glanced at them. "I need the access logs for the administration wing," I said, "and the internal server traffic for the last 6 months." "I need a warrant for that," he said, chewing gum. "I am the auditor appointed by the hospital board to investigate the whistleblowing complaint regarding theft of federal funds," I said, lying effortlessly about the scope of my current authority. "If you deny me access, I will list you as an accessory to obstruction of justice in my report to the FBI tomorrow morning." The gum chewing stopped. He typed a password and spun the monitor around. "Help yourself." I sat down. I wasn't looking for Grant anymore. I knew where Grant was. He was the puppet. I wanted the puppet master. I pulled up the routing numbers for Apex Strategic Solutions. The money went into Apex, but it didn't stay there. It was a pass-through entity. Within 24 hours of every deposit, the funds were wire transferred out. I traced the hops, from Apex to a holding company in Delaware, from Delaware to an account in the Caymans. But auditors have tricks. We know that offshore accounts are opaque, but the access points are not. I couldn't see the account holder's name in the Caymans, but I could see the IP address of the device that logged into the account to check the balance. I ran the trace. The login requests weren't coming from Ashford Enterprises. They weren't coming from Grant's laptop. They were coming from a residential IP address, a specific high-speed fiber connection in the gated community of Silver Creek. I knew that IP address. I had connected to it 100 times during Sunday brunches. It was Celia Ashford's iPad. The money wasn't just for the family business fund, it was her retirement fund. It was her jewelry fund. She was skimming off the top of the skim. She was stealing from the government, stealing from the hospital, and probably even stealing from Warren. I sat back in the chair. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. The pieces fell into place. The desperation to get Dad's power of attorney. The urgency to sign the papers. The hostility. It wasn't just snobbery. It was panic. They were drowning in their own greed, and they needed a lifeboat. They had chosen my father to be that lifeboat. They planned to frame him. If the audit came, they would point to the safety consultant, Frank Dalton, and say he approved the phantom steal. They would say the old senile man had taken the money. They were going to send my father to prison to pay for their country club memberships. I stood up. I printed the logs. I walked out of the security office and into the cool, quiet hallway of the basement. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling of a heavy coat being taken off my shoulders. The coat of being Isla Ashford. The coat of trying to please them. The coat of trying to be good enough. It dropped to the floor, leaving me light and dangerous. I took my phone out. I looked at the text from Celia again. "Did you find the file?" I didn't reply. I deleted the thread. "Okay," I said to the empty hallway. My voice was calm. "So this isn't a family matter anymore." I looked at the stack of evidence in my hand, the forgery, the theft, the betrayal. This is white-collar crime. The sun had not even fully risen over the city skyline, but the war had already begun. It did not start with a scream or a gavel banging in a courtroom. It started with the soft, relentless vibration of my phone on the bedside table of the on-call room I had borrowed for a nap. I picked it up, rubbing the grit from my eyes. I had 5 missed calls from my mother-in-law. Celia. But it was the notifications from the Ashford Circle, a private group chat of high society wives that I had been reluctantly added to 3 years ago that made my stomach turn. It is so sad when the elderly lose their grip. One message read, "Did you hear about Isla's father? A total breakdown at the gala? I heard he was demanding money from Warren." Another replied, "Imagine using a medical emergency to extort your in-laws. Some people really have no shame. I saw him at the hospital." A third chimed in. "He was shouting at the doctors. Delusions of grandeur. He thinks he runs the place. Poor Isla. It must be exhausting supporting a deadbeat parent." I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my eyes. They were rewriting the narrative in real time. They were painting Frank Dalton not as the hero who saved a man's life, but as a senile, greedy old man who was embarrassing his generous in-laws. It was a coordinated strike. They knew they could not fight the facts of the audit, so they were attacking the character of the auditor's family. Then I saw the link. Someone had forwarded a post from a local community news forum called The City Watch. The headline was bold and ugly, "Local Hero or Local Hazard. The Dark Truth About Crown View's Past Safety Officer." The article was anonymous. It claimed to have insider sources, stating that Frank Dalton had been fired in 1998 for gross negligence and reckless endangerment. It implied he had caused the very safety issues he had actually fought against. My hands shook. This wasn't just gossip. This was libel. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a socialite. It was a number I recognized with dread. It was the internal line for human resources at Aegis Compliance Forensics. "This is Coleman," I answered, my voice tight. "Isla, this is David in HR." The voice was clipped, formal. "We have received a priority complaint regarding your current assignment at Crown View Medical." "A complaint?" I asked, sitting up on the cot. "From whom?" "I cannot disclose that," David said, "but the allegation is serious. It claims an undisclosed conflict of interest. The report states that you are using your position to pursue a personal vendetta on behalf of a family member who has a financial dispute with the hospital." "That is a lie," I said. "My father is a patient here. That is the only connection," and I disclosed it to Vance immediately. "The report includes screenshots of text messages." "Isla," David said, his voice dropping. "Messages where you allegedly threaten to take down the administration if your father's demands aren't met. We are putting your access on a probationary hold pending a review. You are to cease all active data collection immediately." I felt the blood drain from my face. Screenshots. I had never sent any threats. "David, those are fabricated," I said. "This is a retaliatory strike because I found evidence of fraud." "Just come into the office on Monday," David said. "Until then, stand down." The line went dead. I sat there in the dim light, feeling the walls closing in. They were fast. I had to give them that. They had moved to cut off my legs before I could even start running. They knew that if I was suspended, the audit would be reassigned to a different team, maybe a team they had already bought off, or at least one that didn't know where to look. I stood up, splashing cold water on my face. "Stand down." That was what they wanted. I walked out of the room and headed straight for Dad's room on the 4th floor. I needed to see him. I needed to make sure he was real. That the man the internet was calling a grifter was still the man who taught me how to ride a bike. When I reached the nurses' station, the atmosphere was wrong. The warm, respectful vibe from the night before had evaporated, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. "Where is he?" I asked the nurse on duty. It wasn't Margaret. It was a young man I didn't recognize. "Mr. Dalton." He checked the screen. "He is scheduled for a psych evaluation in the West Wing. Orderlies just took him down." "A psych evaluation," I snapped. "He is here for a cardiac event. Who ordered a psych consult?" "Dr. Aris," the nurse said. "The note says the patient was exhibiting aggressive and confused behavior." I didn't wait for him to finish. I spun around and ran toward the elevators. "Dr. Aris." I knew that name. He was on the Ashford Foundation's scholarship board. They were trying to build a paper trail of incompetence. If they could get a doctor to certify Dad as confused, everything he said about the past, about the asbestos, the fraud, the kickbacks would be dismissed as the ramblings of a dementia patient. I caught the elevator just as the doors were closing. Inside, leaning against the back wall, was Grant. He looked tired, his tuxedo shirt unbuttoned at the collar, but he was holding 2 coffees. When he saw me, he straightened up, putting on that familiar, boyish smile that used to melt my heart. Now, it just looked like a mask. "Isla," he said, offering me a cup. "I was looking for you. I brought you a latte. Oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, just how you like it." I ignored the coffee. "Where is my father?" "Grant?" "Frank." Grant looked genuinely puzzled, or a masterclass in acting. He is in his room, isn't he? I was just going up to say sorry about last night. My dad Warren can be intense. I wanted to smooth things over. They moved him, I said, watching his eyes. To the psychiatric wing. Someone ordered a mental health hold. Grant frowned. That is terrible, but maybe it is for the best, I mean. Isla, be honest. He was acting pretty erratic at the party, jumping on tables, shouting orders. Maybe he's having an episode. It happens at his age. He was performing CPR. Grant, I said, my voice low and dangerous. He was saving a life while you stood there uselessly. I know, Grant said soothingly. But look at the big picture. The hospital just wants to be safe. And hey, I heard about the trouble at your work. The conflict of interest thing. I froze. How did you hear about that? I asked. HR called me 10 minutes ago. I haven't told anyone. Grant blinked. He took a sip of his coffee, realizing too late that he had stepped on a landmine. Oh, well, he stammered. News travels fast. You know how it is. Mom knows people at Aegis. She probably just heard a rumor. Mom knows people at Aegis, I repeated, and she knows the specific details of a confidential HR complaint that was filed this morning. Isla, stop, Grant said, his voice hardening. You are being paranoid. We are trying to protect you. If you keep digging into these vendor contracts, you are going to destroy your career. Just let it go. Sign the papers for Dad. Let us get him into a nice facility where he can be looked after, and we can go back to our lives. A nice facility, I said. You mean a hole where no one will listen to him? The elevator dinged. We were on the basement level. The doors opened. Standing there was a woman in scrubs. It was Margaret, the head nurse from the night before. She looked at Grant, then at me. She stepped into the elevator, blocking the doors from closing. She ignored Grant completely. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, the edges frayed. Take this, Margaret said to me. What is it? I asked, taking the paper. It is an email printout, Margaret said. From 1998, Frank sent it to the entire nursing staff the day before he was fired. He told us to keep it. He said one day, someone might ask why the cancer rates in the pediatric ward went up. I unfolded the paper. It was a memo from Frank Dalton, safety officer, to staff. Subject warning. Insulation substitution. I have confirmed that the contractor, Ashford Construction, intends to bypass the abatement protocol. The material sitting in the loading dock is not code compliant. It is toxic. I have refused to sign the manifest. If I am removed from this post, know that I did not resign. I was silenced. I looked up at Margaret. Her eyes were wet. He didn't just warn us, Margaret said. He saved us. We refused to go into that wing until they changed the materials. He took the fall so we wouldn't get sick. Grant was staring at the paper. His face was pale. That is fake, Grant whispered. That is a forgery. Get out of the elevator. Grant, I said. Isla, get out. He stumbled backward into the hallway. Margaret hit the button for the psychiatric wing. As the doors closed, I saw Grant pulling out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen in panic. I didn't go to the psych ward immediately. I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed to know how they had filed that HR complaint with screenshots I never sent. I pulled out my phone and logged into the Aegis portal. My access was restricted, but not entirely blocked yet. I went to the security settings. I checked the recent activity log for my user profile. There was a login recorded at 4 o'clock this morning. I was asleep at 4 o'clock. I tapped on the IP address details. It wasn't a remote hack from Russia or China. It was a local connection. The device name was listed clearly in the metadata. Grant Ashford's MacBook Pro. The air left my lungs. My husband. The man who slept beside me. The man who claimed he wanted to protect me. He had used my password, which he must have watched me type 100 times to log into my work account. He had fabricated the threatening messages. He had sent them to HR to get me suspended. He wasn't just a bystander. He was the mole. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a cold, sharp clarity. The marriage was over. It had been over for a long time, but now the corpse was finally starting to smell. I went to the West Wing. I found Dad sitting in a waiting room, flanked by 2 security guards. He looked annoyed, but unharmed. When he saw me, he stood up. "They think I'm crazy, Izzy," he said, shaking his head. "Asking me who the president is, asking me if I hear voices." "I know, Dad," I said, holding up the yellowed email. "But we have the proof that you are the sanest person in this building." I showed the security guards my hospital ID, which I still had clipped to my scrubs. "I am taking this patient back to his room. Dr. Aris's order has been flagged for review by the ethics committee." The guards looked at each other, then at the confident woman in the auditor's scrubs. They stepped aside. I walked Dad back to his room. I settled him in. Then I turned to leave. "Where are you going?" Dad asked. "To finish it," I said. I walked out to the parking garage. It was raining now, a gray, miserable drizzle that slicked the concrete. Grant was waiting by my car. He knew I would come there. He looked soaking wet, his expensive tuxedo ruined. "Isla," he said as I approached. "Please, let me explain." "You logged into my account," I said. I didn't shout. My voice was flat. "You planted fake evidence to get me fired. You tried to gaslight me into thinking my father was crazy." "I did it for us," Grant shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Do you have any idea what will happen if this audit goes through? My father will go to prison. My mother, they will lose everything. The house, the company, the reputation, and we will lose it too. Isla, our life, our future. Our future." I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Grant, you stole my identity to protect your inheritance. I am trying to save the family," he pleaded. "You are my wife. You are supposed to be on my side. You are supposed to protect me." "I am protecting the truth," I said. "And right now, the truth is that you are a criminal." I unlocked my car door. "Isla, don't do this," Grant said. He stepped in front of the door. "If you upload those files, if you give that email to the board, it is war. My father won't hold back. He will destroy you." "He already tried," I said. "He failed." "Isla, choose," Grant said, his eyes desperate. "Choose right now, me or your vendetta." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had wasted 3 years on. "I choose my father," I said, "and I choose myself." I shoved past him and got into the driver's seat. I slammed the door. Grant stood there in the rain, looking like a lost child. But I knew better. He wasn't lost. He was just caught. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was a text message from an unknown number. I picked it up. "You think you are clever, but accidents happen in hospitals every day. Oxygen lines get cut. Medication dosages get mixed up. If you don't delete those files by noon, your father is going to have a very unfortunate relapse." I stared at the screen. The threat was vague enough to be deniable, but specific enough to stop my heart. I looked up at the rearview mirror. I could see the hospital looming behind me. My father was in there, alone. I put the car in park. "Okay," I whispered to the empty car. "You want to threaten his life?" I gripped the steering wheel. "Then I am going to take your life apart, brick by brick." I stared at the text message on my phone screen. The threat against my father's life for exactly 10 seconds. Panic is a biological reaction, but I had trained myself to suppress it. In my line of work, panic causes you to miss the decimal point that hides the embezzlement. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of rain and exhaust, and then I drove my car not to the exit, but to the service entrance of the hospital. I walked straight into the security command center. I did not ask for permission. I flashed my Aegis badge and placed my phone on the desk of the shift supervisor. "This is a credible threat against the life of a patient in room 402, I said, my voice dead calm. "Frank Dalton. I want a 24-hour guard on his door. I want his food trays checked. I want his medication logs dual verified by the head nurse. If a single hair on his head is touched, I will name this hospital as a co-defendant in a wrongful death suit that will make the national news. The supervisor looked at the text, then at me. He saw the scrubs, the badge, and the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, I need 2 units to the 4th floor immediately. Code yellow protocols." Once I knew Dad was safe behind a wall of security, I made my next move. I sent a message to Warren Ashford. "I am ready to talk. Meet me in the boardroom at 10 o'clock. I will bring the files." It was the bait they were waiting for. They thought I was surrendering. They thought the threat had worked. At 10 o'clock sharp, I walked into the executive boardroom on the top floor of Crownview Medical. It was a sterile aquarium of glass and mahogany, offering a panoramic view of the city my father had spent his life protecting. The Ashfords were already there. They sat on one side of the long table like a panel of judges. Warren was at the head, looking grim but triumphant. Celia was next to him, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. Grant sat at the end, refusing to look at the door when I entered. "You are late," Warren said, checking his watch. "We expected you 5 minutes ago." "I had to clear security," I said, placing a heavy stack of file folders on the table. I remained standing. "It is tighter than usual today." "Sit down, Isla," Celia said, gesturing to the chair opposite them. "Let us get this unpleasantness over with. We have a brunch reservation at noon." I sat. The distance between us felt like miles. "We have prepared a solution," Warren said, sliding a document across the polished wood. "This is a family settlement agreement. It is very generous, considering the damage you have caused." I looked at the document. It was thick, bound in blue paper. "The terms are simple," Warren continued, his voice smooth. "You will recuse yourself from the audit immediately, citing personal health reasons. You will turn over all data you have collected. In exchange, we will agree not to press charges against Frank for his erratic behavior and the false claims he made about the asbestos. And," Celia added, "we will cover his medical bills, including the psychiatric care he obviously needs." Grant pushed a second document toward me. He looked pale, his eyes rimmed with red. "And this, Isla, this is a separation agreement. We can file for an uncontested divorce in 6 months. It includes a non-disclosure agreement. You get a settlement, enough to set you up, but you can never speak about the hospital contracts, ever." I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen Grant was holding out to me. "So that is the deal," I said softly. "I sell out my professional integrity. I let you institutionalize my father to shut him up, and I take hush money to leave the marriage." "It is a lifeline, Isla," Grant said, his voice cracking. "Take it, please, before Dad changes his mind." I picked up the pen. Warren smirked. Celia relaxed her shoulders. Then, I flipped the pen around and used the back end to push the papers off the table. They fluttered to the floor, landing in a messy heap. "No," I said. The silence in the room was absolute. "Excuse me," Warren asked, his voice dropping to a growl. "You do not have leverage here, girl. You are a daughter-in-law. You are a guest in our world." "I am not a guest," I said. I opened the first folder from my stack. "And I am not just a daughter-in-law. I am a certified fraud examiner, and I am the person who just finished tracing your money." I slid a spreadsheet across the table. "This is the ledger for Apex Strategic Solutions," I said. "You set it up 18 months ago. You have been billing the hospital for seismic retrofitting materials that were never delivered. The steel phantom, the HVAC units non-existent," Warren scoffed, waving a hand. "Paperwork errors. We use subcontractors. If they fail to deliver, that is on them." "I thought you might say that," I said, opening the second folder. So I looked at the subcontractors: Titan Construction, Blue Sky Logistics. They are registered to P.O. boxes in Nevada and Delaware. But here's the interesting part. The incorporation fees for both companies were paid by a credit card. I pulled out a bank statement. "Your credit card." Celia froze. Her hand went to her throat. "That is absurd. I lend my card to my assistants all the time." For corporate espionage, I asked. I doubt it. I turned to Grant. And you? You are the signatory. Every fraudulent invoice has your digital fingerprint on it. But you got lazy. Grant, you used the same authorization key to sign off on the safety inspections. I pulled out the document that made my heart hurt the most. It was the safety compliance certificate for the new East Wing grant. You needed a certified safety officer to unlock the federal funds, I said. But you didn't have one, because real safety officers actually inspect the building, so you forged the signature of the one man you knew wouldn't check. You signed Frank Dalton on this document 3 months ago. He was a consultant, Warren shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He worked for us. If the signature is there, he signed it. He is the one who committed fraud. He is senile. He probably forgot he signed it. He didn't sign it, I said calmly, because on the date this document was signed, March 12th, my father was in physical therapy for his knee. I have the clinic logs. He was nowhere near this hospital. It doesn't matter, Warren yelled. He stood up, looming over the table. He is the safety officer of record if there is fraud. It is on his license. We will testify that he demanded the kickbacks. We have the lawyers. We have the money. Who is going to believe a mechanic over the Ashford family? We will bury him, Celia hissed. We will paint him as a corrupt, bitter old man who used his daughter to extort us. We will ruin him. Isla. And you will watch. I looked at them. They were cornered animals, baring their teeth. You really think you can pin this on him? I asked. We already have, Grant said, his voice trembling. The paperwork is filed. The trail leads to Frank. Just sign the NDA. Isla, it is over. You are right, I said. It is over. I looked at the door. Margaret, can you come in? The heavy mahogany door opened. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a police officer. It was Margaret, the chief nursing officer. She was wearing her blue scrubs, standing tall. In her hands, she held a thick, leather-bound book. It was old. The spine cracked and taped. The Ashfords looked confused. Who is this? Warren demanded. Get the staff out of here. This is the witness, I said. Margaret walked to the table. She didn't look at the Ashfords. She placed the book down with a heavy thud. This is the unit logbook from 1998, Margaret said. Her voice was steady. We are supposed to destroy them after 10 years, but Frank told me to keep this one. He said, Margaret, hide this. One day, the walls are going to talk. She opened the book to a marked page. Here, she pointed. Dated November 14th, 1998, entry by Safety Officer Frank Dalton. Insulation material arriving on site does not match manifest. Markings indicate grade C industrial filler, not medical grade, highly flammable, toxic particulate risk. Contractor Warren Ashford refused to halt offload. I am formally noting my objection and refusal to certify. Margaret looked up at Warren. And here, on the next page, a note from the hospital administrator the very next day. Officer Dalton relieved of duty, reason insubordination. The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a roar. That proves it, I said. Frank didn't conspire with you. He blew the whistle on you 20 years ago, and you fired him for it. This book establishes a pattern of behavior. It proves that using his name on the new contracts wasn't just fraud, it was a vendetta. Warren's face had gone from red to a terrifying shade of gray. He stared at the logbook as if it were a bomb. That is inadmissible, Warren stammered. It is an old diary. It proves nothing. It proves intent, I said. Grant suddenly stood up. He was panicking. His eyes were wild. But the email, Grant shouted, pointing at me. The email Margaret showed us in the elevator, I deleted it. I logged into the server this morning and wiped the archive. I scrubbed the backups. It is gone. You can't use an email that doesn't exist. He stopped. He looked around the room. Celia had covered her face with her hands. Warren was staring at his son with pure horror. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "Thank you, Grant," I said softly. "What?" Grant breathed. "I didn't have the email," I said. "Margaret showed you a printout in the elevator, but we couldn't find the digital original in the server. We suspected you had destroyed it, but we couldn't prove it." I leaned forward. "But you just confessed to destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice in front of witnesses." Grant slumped back into his chair. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He whispered. You thought you were saving the family," I said. "You just buried it." I stood up and walked to the wall of the boardroom. I pressed the button for the intercom. "Mr. Vance, you can come in now." The door at the far end of the boardroom, the one leading to the legal counsel's office, swung open. Jonathan Vance, the senior partner of Aegis, walked in. He was followed by the hospital's general counsel and two men in suits who didn't need badges to be identified as federal investigators. "Good morning," Vance said, his voice gravelly. He looked at the Ashfords with the expression of an exterminator looking at a particularly large infestation. "This meeting," Vance announced, placing a recording device on the table, "has been monitored under the authorization of the hospital board and federal authorities pursuant to a warrant for wire fraud and embezzlement." Warren Ashford slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked old. "Isla," Celia whispered, reaching a hand out across the table. Her voice was trembling. "We are family. Please, there must be a misunderstanding." I looked at her hand. The diamonds on her fingers glittered. They were bought with the money that should have reinforced the walls of a pediatric wing. "No, Celia," I said. "We aren't family. I am the auditor. You are the subject." I turned to the investigators. "My preliminary report is complete," I said. "You have the confession regarding the destruction of evidence. The rest of the paper trail is on the secure drive." I looked at Grant one last time. He had his head in his hands. He was crying. "I told you," I said to him. "I chose the truth." I picked up my stack of folders. I walked past the Ashfords, past the stunned silence, and out into the hallway where Margaret was waiting. "Is it done?" Margaret asked. "The audit is done," I said. "Now, let's go get my father out of that room." The door to the boardroom clicked shut behind me, sealing them in with the consequences of their own arrogance. The trap hadn't just closed, it had locked. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the boardroom. 3 days of legal silence, of frozen assets, and of a stillness that felt like the eye of a hurricane. I expected the Ashfords to hide. I expected them to retreat behind their gates at Silver Creek and wait for the indictments to come down, but I had underestimated their capacity for denial. To people like Warren and Celia, reality is just a suggestion, something to be bent until it fits the shape of their ego. So when Crown View Medical Center announced a gala to honor the heroes of public safety, a hastily arranged but lavish event designed to restore morale after the rumors of the audit began to circulate, the Ashfords did not decline the invitation. They RSVP'd for 4. They were going to try to steal the narrative one last time. The event was held in the main atrium of the hospital. It was a space usually reserved for anxious families and rushing gurneys. But tonight, it had been transformed. High tables with white linens dotted the floor. A string quartet played softly near the reception desk. It was eerie how much it resembled the Marlowe atrium from the night of the party. Yet the energy was entirely different. The Marlowe smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. This place smelled of floor wax and history. I arrived early. I was not walking behind my husband this time. I was walking beside my father. Frank Dalton was wearing a new suit. I had bought it for him yesterday. Not because he asked for it, but because he deserved armor that fit him. It was navy blue, tailored to accommodate the way he stood. And against the crisp white shirt, his face looked younger. The tiredness that had clung to him for years seemed to have lifted. "You look sharp, Dad," I said, adjusting his lapel. "I feel like an imposter," Dad muttered, looking at the banner hanging from the second-floor railing. It read, "Crown View Honors Integrity in Action." "I just did my job." Izzy, I don't need a parade. You are getting one anyway, I said. And you are going to stand there and take it, for everyone who didn't get a parade. Then, the doors opened, and the Ashfords arrived. They made an entrance that would have been impressive if it weren't so delusional. Warren was in a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Celia was draped in silver sequins, looking like a disco ball that had gained sentience and malice. Grant walked a step behind them, his face pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. They swept into the room, smiling at people who were actively trying to avoid eye contact. They were treating this like a victory lap. They were banking on the fact that the audit results were still sealed, known only to the board and the federal investigators. They thought they could brazen it out. They thought if they stood next to the hero, the shine would rub off on them. Celia spotted us and made a beeline across the floor. She moved with the unstoppable momentum of a tank in chiffon. "Frank!" she cried out, her voice pitching up to a theatrical soprano. She reached out to grab his hands, ignoring the fact that he kept them firmly at his sides. "Oh, look at you. The man of the hour. We are just so proud. I have been telling everyone all week that is our Frank. Family first, right?" She turned to the couple standing next to us, Dr. Evans and his wife. "We have always supported Frank," Celia lied, flashing a blinding smile. "Even when he was having his difficulties, we knew there was a diamond in the rough." I watched her, marveling at the audacity. She was trying to rewrite history while the ink on the police report was still wet. "Hello, Celia," I said. My voice was cool, devoid of the deference I had shown her for 3 years. She looked at me, her eyes hardening for a fraction of a second before the mask slipped back into place. "Isla, darling, you look tired, but don't worry. Warren has spoken to the board. We are going to smooth this whole misunderstanding over. Grant tells me you have been under a lot of stress. We can fix that." "There is nothing to fix," I said. "And I am not tired. I am just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Grant asked, stepping forward. He lowered his voice. "Isla, don't make a scene. Not here. There are press photographers. Just smile. Stand with us for the photo op, and we can discuss the separation agreement tomorrow." "I am not standing with you, Grant," I said. I took a step sideways, putting a clear 3 feet of distance between us. "I am standing with my father." Before Grant could argue, the lights in the atrium dimmed. A spotlight hit the small stage that had been set up near the elevators. The hospital CEO, a stern woman named Dr. Kincaid, stepped up to the microphone. The room went silent. "Good evening," Dr. Kincaid said. "Tonight is about memory. Hospitals are places where we often focus on the future, the next cure, the next patient, but sometimes we must look back to understand who kept this building standing." She gestured to the large projection screen behind her. "We have spoken a lot recently about safety protocols." Dr. Kincaid continued, her eyes flickering briefly toward the Ashfords. "But protocols are just paper without people to enforce them. Tonight, we honor the man who wrote the book on safety for this city, a man who, 20 years ago, sacrificed his career to ensure that the walls of this hospital did not become a tomb." The screen flickered to life. It was not a polished corporate video. It was grainy, handheld footage from 1998. The date stamp in the corner read November 14th. The image showed a chaotic construction site. There was dust everywhere. Men were shouting. And in the center of the frame, standing in front of a massive truck loaded with pink insulation, was a younger Frank Dalton. He looked fierce. He was shouting at a foreman, his finger pointing at the manifest. "I don't care what the budget says." The voice on the video cracked through the speakers. "That is grade C filler. It is flammable. You are not putting that in a pediatric ward while I am standing here." The camera shook as someone tried to block the lens, but the audio kept rolling. "You are going to get fired, Frank," a voice shouted, a voice that sounded unmistakably like a younger Warren Ashford. "Then fire me," Frank's voice roared back. "But you are not unloading that truck." The video cut to black. Then, a new image appeared. It was a photo of Frank from last week, performing CPR on the floor of the Marlowe atrium, his face focused, his hands saving a life. The lights came up. The applause did not start instantly. It began with a single person clapping. Then another. Then it swelled, rolling through the atrium like a wave. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was a thunderous, emotional ovation. Doctors were clapping. Nurses were cheering. The wealthy donors, the same people who had laughed at Frank's staff napkin a week ago, were now looking at him with wide, realized eyes. They realized they had mocked a man who had more integrity in his little finger than they had in their entire portfolios. I looked at the Ashfords. Warren was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He recognized the footage. He knew that the video proved he had lied about the asbestos. He knew that everyone in the room now knew he was the man who tried to cut corners on a children's ward. Celia was looking around the room, her smile frozen in a rictus of terror. She saw the way her friends were looking at her. They weren't looking with envy anymore. They were looking with judgment. And now, "Doctor," Kincaid said, "I would like to invite Mr. Frank Dalton to the stage." Dad squeezed my hand. "Here we go," he whispered. He walked up the stairs. He didn't limp. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who has nothing to hide. When he reached the microphone, he didn't give a speech. He just looked out at the crowd. "I did what anyone would do," Dad said simply. "I just made sure the foundation was strong, because if the foundation is rotten, the house falls down." He looked directly at Warren Ashford. "Eventually," Dad added. The room erupted again. Dr. Kincaid stepped back to the mic. "Thank you. Mr. Dalton, in light of recent findings regarding our historical and current infrastructure projects, the board of directors has made a decision." The room went quiet. This was not on the program. "Effective immediately." "Doctor," Kincaid announced, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Crownview Medical Center is suspending all vendor relationships with Ashford Enterprises and its subsidiaries pending the outcome of a federal investigation into billing fraud and safety violations." The gasp that went through the room sucked the air out of the space. This wasn't a rumor. This was a public execution of the Ashford brand. Celia Ashford snapped. The facade of the gracious matriarch shattered. She lunged forward, pushing past a waiter, heading for the stairs to the stage. "No!" Celia shrieked. "You cannot say that. That is slander. We are the donors. We paid for this wing. You cannot speak about us like this." She tried to climb the stairs, her silver dress catching on the railing. "I demand the microphone," Celia screamed. "I need to clarify my husband is a pillar of this community." Two large security guards stepped in front of her. They didn't touch her, but they formed a wall she couldn't pass. "Ma'am," the lead guard said, his voice low but firm. "You need to step back." "Do not touch me," Celia yelled. Her face twisted and ugly. "I am Celia Ashford. I own you people." "Not anymore, Mrs. Ashford," the guard said. The humiliation was total. The entire room, the doctors, the donors, the press watched as the woman who had spent her life judging others was reduced to a screaming banshee being denied entry to the platform. Warren grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back. "Celia, stop. Stop it. You are making it worse. They are ruining us. Warren," she sobbed, collapsing against him. I stood near the edge of the crowd, watching them unravel. It was tragic, in a way. They looked so small. "Isla." I turned. Grant was standing there. He looked wrecked. His tuxedo tie was undone, his eyes wet. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No, Grant," I said honestly. "I am not happy. This isn't a game. I don't get points for this." "You destroyed us," he whispered. "Mom, she is going to have a breakdown. Dad is going to lose the company. And me, I am going to lose my license. I might go to jail. Isla, do you care about that at all?" We were married, I said. "But you were never my husband. You were just their son." "I can fix it," Grant pleaded, reaching for my hand. "If you just retract the report, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were angry. We can go away. We can move to Europe. I have money stashed that they don't know about. Please, Isla, don't let them take me." I looked at his hand, the hand that had signed the fake invoices, the hand that had logged into my computer to frame me. "You still don't get it," I said. "You think this is about money. You think you can buy your way out of the truth." "It is always about money," Grant hissed. "That is how the world works." "Not my world," I said. I looked past him, to where my father was standing on the stage, shaking hands with the young doctors who were looking at him with awe. "I want the truth, Grant," I said, "and I want my father to be able to walk down the street without looking over his shoulder. I want him to know that he wasn't a fool for being honest. I want him to know that the good guys win sometimes." "You are delusional," Grant spat. "Nobody wins. We all just lose differently." "Maybe," I said, "but tonight I am sleeping just fine." I turned away from him. A man in a sharp gray suit approached me. It was the lead counsel for the hospital, accompanied by Jonathan Vance from Aegis. "Mrs. Coleman," the counsel said. He held out a thick, sealed envelope. "Is this it?" I asked. "This is the final dossier," Vance said. "We matched the Cayman transfers to the hospital invoices. We have the IP logs from Celia's iPad. We have the confession Grant made on the tape. It is airtight." The counsel nodded. "The FBI is waiting in the executive office. They are ready to move, but they wanted to know if you were prepared to sign the formal affidavit as the primary witness. Once you sign this, there is no going back. The Ashfords will be arrested tonight." I took the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt like the weight of 3 years of silence, 3 years of insults, 3 years of watching my father be treated like furniture. I looked at the Ashfords, who were now huddled near the exit, arguing with each other, pointing fingers, their dynasty crumbling into dust. I looked at the envelope. "I am not just ready," I said, looking Vance in the eye. "I have been ready since the moment they laughed at his coat." "Then let's finish it," Vance said. I took the pen he offered. "Do you want to go to the office?" the counsel asked. "No," I said. "I want to go to my dad. I want him to see this." I walked toward the stage, the envelope in my hand, ready to deliver the final blow that would close the door on the House of Ashford forever. The boardroom on the top floor of Crown View Medical Center was silent. It was a different kind of silence than the one in the emergency room 3 nights ago. That silence had been filled with fear and uncertainty. This silence was heavy with the weight of impending judgment. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table. My father, Frank Dalton, sat to my right. He was not looking at the view of the city skyline. He was looking at his hands, those same scarred, capable hands that had saved a life on the floor of the Marlowe atrium. The double doors opened. Warren, Celia, and Grant Ashford walked in. They were not alone. They were flanked by the hospital's general counsel, Jonathan Vance from Aegis, and 2 men in dark suits who did not introduce themselves. The Ashfords looked small. The arrogance that had fueled them for decades had evaporated, leaving behind 3 frightened people in expensive clothes that no longer seemed to fit them. "Sit down," I said. It was the first time in 3 years I had given an order to my in-laws. Warren hesitated, his face a map of broken pride, but he pulled out a chair. Celia collapsed into hers, clutching a handkerchief. Grant would not look at me. He stared at the polished wood of the table, his shoulders hunched. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I placed the dossier on the table. It made a heavy, dull thud that echoed in the room. "This is the end," I said. I opened the first folder. "We have the amended contracts," I began, my voice steady. "We have the invoices from Titan Construction and Blue Sky Logistics. We have confirmed that neither company has a physical office, employees, or inventory. They are shell entities registered to a post office box in Delaware." I slid a second paper across the table. "We have the bank records. We traced the wire transfers from the hospital to the shell companies, and then immediately to an offshore account in the Caymans. And thanks to the IP logs from the device used to access that account, we know exactly who controls the money." I looked at Celia. She flinched. It was not a blind trust, I said. It was your personal retirement fund. Celia, you were stealing from a seismic safety grant to pay for your jewelry. Celia stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I didn't know where the money came from. Warren handles the business. I just spend what is in the account. Stop it, Mother, Grant said. His voice was hoarse. He finally looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Stop lying. It is over. Grant looked at me. I signed the invoices. Isla, I knew they were fake. I knew the steel never arrived. I knew the HVAC units were phantom. Why, Grant, I asked, you have millions. Why steal from a hospital? Because we don't have millions, Grant whispered. Not anymore. Dad made bad bets on the futures market 5 years ago. We have been leveraging debt to pay debt. The hospital contract was supposed to be the fix. We thought if we just took a little off the top from the government grant, we could stabilize the portfolio before anyone noticed. A little off the top, Frank spoke up. His voice was low, rumbling like distant thunder. You compromised the structural integrity of a building that houses sick children. You didn't take money. You took safety. You took trust. Warren slammed his hand on the table, trying to summon the ghost of his former authority. This is entrapment. We will sue. I will have my legal team tear this audit apart. You cannot prove intent. These were clerical errors. Jonathan Vance leaned forward. Mr. Ashford, you are not listening. The evidence is not just in this room. It is currently being uploaded to the servers of the Department of Justice. We have the digital logs. We have the confession your son made on a recorded line. And most importantly, we have the witness. What witness? Warren snarled. That nurse with the diary? That is hearsay. No, I said. Not the nurse. I pointed to the glass wall of the boardroom that looked out into the hallway. Standing there, talking to a federal agent, was Harrison Thorne. He was the hedge fund manager from the party. The man who had made the joke about my father using a wrench instead of a fork. Warren's face went white. Harrison, Warren gasped. He is my friend. He was your investor, I corrected. And when he found out that his capital was being used to fund a criminal enterprise that was about to be indicted, he decided to protect his own assets. He came to us this morning. He gave a sworn statement that you solicited him to invest in Ashford Enterprises, using the hospital contracts as collateral for a loan that you never intended to repay. The twist hung in the air. The people the Ashfords had tried to impress the high society friends they had mocked my father in front of were the first ones to turn on them when the ship started to sink. They had insulted the man who would have saved them and trusted the people who would sell them out. He sold us out, Warren whispered, sinking back into his chair. He did what you taught him to do, I said coldly. He looked out for number one. I pushed a final document toward Grant. This is not a legal exhibit, I said. This is for me. Grant looked at the paper. It was the divorce petition. Isla, he choked out. Please, we can work this out. I can testify. I can cut a deal. If we stick together. There is no we, Grant, I said. You chose your family. You chose the lie. And you tried to destroy my father to cover your tracks. I do not negotiate with people who weaponize mental health and forge signatures. I uncapped a pen and set it down. Sign it now, or I will add a civil suit for emotional distress and identity theft to the federal charges. Grant took the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He signed his name, the same signature he had used to rob the hospital, now used to sign away his marriage. Celia began to weep, a loud, ugly sound. She turned to Frank, reaching out a hand laden with diamonds. Frank, please, she begged. You know us. You worked here. You know how hard it is to maintain a legacy. Tell her to stop this. We are good people. We just made a mistake. My father looked at her. He didn't pull away, but he didn't offer comfort. He looked at her with a clarity that was devastating. I did work here, Celia, Dad said. And I left my job 20 years ago because I refused to become what you are. I would rather be a broke mechanic with a clean conscience than a billionaire who can't sleep at night. He stood up. I have nothing to say to you, Dad said, except that I hope you learn how to use a spoon in prison. I hear they don't give you knives. The door opened again. The two men in suits stepped forward. They did not pull out handcuffs. They didn't need to. The weight of the situation was restraint enough. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Ashford, Grant, one of the agents said, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding the findings of the audit. They stood up. Warren looked like a ghost. Celia was sobbing. Grant looked like a man walking to the gallows. They were led out of the boardroom, into the long glass-walled corridor that ran the length of the administration wing. And then, it happened. As the Ashfords were escorted down the hall, the doors to the various departments opened. Nurses, doctors, orderlies, and administrators stepped out. They didn't shout. They didn't jeer. They simply lined the hallway. They were the people the Ashfords had ignored. The staff, the help. As the Ashfords walked past, heads bowed in shame, the staff turned their backs on them. One by one, they rotated, presenting a wall of blue scrubs and white coats to the billionaires. But as my father and I stepped out of the boardroom behind them, the wall turned again. Dr. Evans was there. Margaret was there. The young resident from the ER was there. They stood tall. They straightened their shoulders. And as Frank Dalton walked down the hall, the man who had been mocked for his cheap suit and his limp, the staff of Crown View Medical Center raised their hands. They saluted him. It wasn't a military drill. It was a wave of respect that rippled down the corridor. It was a silent acknowledgement that while the Ashfords had owned the building, Frank Dalton owned the soul of the place. Dad stopped. He looked at them. His chin trembled slightly, but he held his head high. He nodded, a slow, solemn dip of his head to the people he had protected, and who had protected him in return. We walked past the Ashfords, who were now waiting at the elevator, ignored and irrelevant. I didn't look at Grant. I didn't look at the ring on his finger or the fear in his eyes. He was part of a past I had already audited and closed. We walked out the main doors, into the cool night air. The sirens of the police cars were flashing silently in the driveway, waiting for the family I had left behind. I stopped on the sidewalk and turned to my father. The city lights were reflecting in his eyes. "Dad," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "I am sorry." He looked at me, surprised. "Sorry for what?" "Izzy." "I am sorry I let them laugh at you," I said, the tears finally spilling over. "I am sorry I tried to make you fit into their world. I am sorry it took me 3 years to see that you were the one with the class, not them." Dad smiled. He reached out and brushed a tear from my cheek with his rough, calloused thumb. "Isla," he said softly, "you didn't let them do anything. You were just learning the difference between price and value." He took my arm, steadying himself on his bad leg. "Besides," he added, looking back at the hospital where the staff was still standing watch, "you don't need to apologize for my coat. You are standing straight, with your head up and your hands clean. That is all the legacy I ever wanted." I squeezed his arm. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt free. "Come on, Dad," I said. "Let's go home. I think I owe you a dinner, and I promise, we can use whatever fork we want." We turned and walked away from the hospital, into the quiet dark, leaving the sirens and the diamonds far behind us. The audit was closed. The account was balanced. And for the first time in a long time, the numbers finally added up. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through betrayal, justice, and the realization that true worth isn't found in a bank account. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from today. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Hila and Frank's victory, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Your support means the world. Until next time.